Hey friends, tonight we're going to rest with something that might surprise you. We're turning to the book of Lamentations, 5 poems born from the deepest grief Jerusalem ever knew, and we're going to let them carry us into sleep. I know what you might be thinking. Lamentations? For bedtime? But stay with me here, because there's something profoundly comforting about sitting with honest sorrow, about finding words for the pain we sometimes carry, about discovering that even in the darkest night, we're not alone. So find your most comfortable position, maybe adjust your pillow one more time, and let's begin this journey together through ancient tears that somehow, mysteriously, lead us toward rest. Picture Jerusalem in 586 BC. The sun rises over a city that no longer exists. Not really, not as it was. The great walls, those massive stones that had stood for generations, lie scattered like a giant's discarded toys. The temple, Solomon's temple, that breathtaking structure of cedar and gold, where the presence of God himself was said to dwell, is nothing now but charred beams and ash. The Babylonians came, and they were thorough. They didn't just conquer Jerusalem, they erased it. They dismantled it stone by stone, as if trying to prove that this city, this people, this God, could be undone by human hands and human fury. And in the ruins, someone sits. We don't know exactly who, though tradition has long pointed to the prophet Jeremiah, the weeping prophet who had warned and watched his warnings come true. But maybe it doesn't matter so much who holds the pen, because these poems, these 5 chapters of grief, they speak for everyone who survived. Every mother who lost a child, every priest who watched the holy place burn, every elder who remembered when these streets rang with festival songs and children's laughter, every young person who would grow up knowing only the taste of exile and ash. The Book of Lamentations is an acrostic. Each chapter, except the 3rd, follows the Hebrew alphabet from Aleph to Tav, from beginning to end. It's as if the poet is saying, we will grieve from A to Z. We will walk through every letter of loss. We will give voice to the full alphabet of anguish. There's something almost obsessive about it, this need to be complete, to leave nothing unsaid. And maybe that's exactly what grief demands, a systematic cataloguing of what's been lost, a refusal to skip over even a single letter of pain. Chapter 1 begins with a single word in Hebrew, ekah. How? It's a cry, not a question. How did this happen? How did the city once full of people now sit alone? How has she who was great among the nations become like a widow? The poet isn't looking for answers, not really. This is the voice of shock, of someone staring at catastrophe and unable to process what their eyes are seeing. Jerusalem, the beloved city, personified as a woman, a princess among provinces, now sits in forced labour, subjugated, enslaved. She weeps bitterly in the night, tears on her cheeks. Among all her lovers, she has no one to comfort her. All her friends have dealt treacherously with her. They have become her enemies. You can feel the loneliness here, can't you? It's not just that Jerusalem has fallen, it's that she's been abandoned. Her allies, the nations she trusted, they've turned away. Or worse, they've joined the jackals, picking over her remains. And she weeps in the night, because night is when grief becomes unbearable, when there are no distractions, no tasks to perform, just you and your loss, and the darkness pressing in. If you've ever wept in the night, if you've ever felt that particular ache of 3 a.m. sorrow, you know this feeling. The poet knows it too, and writes it down, gives it shape, makes it something we can hold. Judah has gone into exile, into affliction and hard servitude. She lives now among the nations, but finds no resting place. All her pursuers have overtaken her in the midst of her distress. The roads to Zion mourn, for no one comes to the festivals. All her gates are desolate, her priests groan, her young women grieve, and her lot is bitter. There's a rhythm to this catalogue of loss, a poetic structure that somehow makes the unbearable almost bearable. By naming each sorrow, by giving it form and metre, the poet creates a container for grief that might otherwise overflow and drown us entirely. The festivals, those joyful gatherings where pilgrims would stream into Jerusalem 3 times a year, singing the psalms of ascent. Those roads are empty now, silent. The gates that once bustled with merchants and travellers stand abandoned. The young women, who should be dancing at weddings and celebrations, they grieve instead. Everything that should be is not. Everything that was has vanished. And in this inversion of the natural order, we feel not just Jerusalem's pain, but the pain of every displacement, every exile, every time the world we knew was torn away. Her foes have become the head. Her enemies prosper because the Lord has afflicted her for the multitude of her transgressions. Her children have gone away, captives before the foe. And here we come to the theological heart of Lamentations, the question that makes this book almost unbearable to read, and yet somehow necessary. This isn't presented as random tragedy. It's not just bad luck or the fortunes of war. The poet insists that God himself has done this. The Lord has afflicted her. This is judgment, consequence, the working out of covenant curses that had been spelled out centuries before. If you turn away, if you forget, if you choose injustice over justice, if you worship other gods, then these things will come upon you. And they did. From daughter Zion, all her majesty has departed. Her princes have become like stags that find no pasture. They fled without strength before the pursuer. Jerusalem remembers, in the days of her affliction and wandering, all the precious things that were hers in days of old. When her people fell into the hand of the foe, and there was no one to help her, her foes looked on and mocked at her downfall. There's something particularly cruel about being mocked in your moment of greatest weakness, isn't there? It's not enough that Jerusalem has fallen. Her enemies stand around laughing, pointing, finding entertainment in her misery. And she remembers. Oh, how she remembers. She remembers what was, and that makes what is even more painful. Jerusalem sinned grievously, so she has become a mockery. All who honoured her despise her, for they have seen her nakedness. She herself groans and turns her face away. The imagery here is visceral, almost too intimate. Jerusalem is stripped, exposed, humiliated. The word for nakedness here carries connotations of shame, of vulnerability, of violation. This isn't just military defeat, it's personal degradation. And in her shame, she can't even look. She turns away, groans, hides her face. The poet doesn't shy away from this, doesn't try to make it prettier than it is. Grief is often ugly, undignified, raw, and Lamentations lets it be exactly that. Her uncleanness was in her skirts. She took no thought of her future. Her downfall was astounding. She had no comforter. O Lord, behold my affliction, for the enemy has triumphed. The thought here is that Jerusalem had become ritually impure, had carried her sin like a visible stain, and had ignored the warnings, taken no thought of where this path would lead. And now, in the shock of consequence, she cries out. She addresses God directly. This is the first time in the poem that Jerusalem speaks, and her words are simple, desperate, a cry for God to see, to witness, to acknowledge what has happened. O Lord, behold, just look, just see what your people are enduring. The enemy stretched out his hand to all her precious things. She saw the nations invade her sanctuary, those whom you forbade to enter your congregation. All her people groan as they search for bread. They trade their treasures for food to revive their strength. Look, O Lord, and see, for I am despised. The holy things, the temple treasures, the sacred vessels that had been set apart for worship, now they're in enemy hands. And beyond the temple, the people themselves, once fed and satisfied, now groan with hunger, trading away whatever they have left. Family heirlooms, precious memories, anything for a piece of bread. The groaning here connects back to the groaning of the priests mentioned earlier. It's as if the whole city has become one continuous sound of suffering. Is it nothing to you, all you who pass by? Look and see if there is any sorrow like my sorrow, which was brought upon me, which the Lord inflicted on the day of his fierce anger. These words, is it nothing to you, all you who pass by? They've echoed through history, been quoted in passion settings, used to voice the suffering of Christ. become a kind of universal cry of the afflicted. They speak to the terrible isolation of suffering, the feeling that the world goes on, people pass by, and your pain means nothing to them. They don't stop. They don't see. Or if they see, they don't care. And so Jerusalem calls out, forces them to look, demands acknowledgement. Look and see. Witness this sorrow. Don't turn away. From on high he sent fire. Into my bones he made it descend. He spread a net for my feet. He turned me back. He has left me stunned, faint all day long. The imagery shifts here, becomes more active, more violent. God is portrayed as hunter, as warrior, as the one who has actively brought about this destruction. He sent fire into the bones, not a quick external burn, but something that works from the inside out, consuming the very structure of being. He spread a net, trapped Jerusalem like prey. He turned her back when she tried to flee, and the result is stunning, a state of shock and exhaustion that lasts all day long, day after day, a weariness that has no end. My transgressions were bound into a yoke. By his hand they were fastened together. They weighed on my neck. He caused my strength to fail. The Lord handed me over to those whom I cannot withstand. The metaphor of the yoke is powerful here. Sin isn't just individual acts. It accumulates, gets bound together, becomes a weight that bows the neck and drains strength. And God himself, the poet says, fashioned this yoke, placed it on Jerusalem's shoulders, handed her over to enemies too strong to resist. There's no escape here, no fighting back, just submission to consequence, to the weight of accumulated failure. The Lord rejected all my mighty men in my midst. He summoned an assembly against me to crush my young men. The Lord has trodden as in a winepress the virgin daughter Judah. The winepress image is particularly brutal. In the ancient world, wine was made by treading grapes underfoot, crushing them, extracting their juice. Here, God is the one doing the treading, and Judah is the grape, crushed, broken, her lifeblood flowing out. The mighty men, who should have been her defence, are rejected, set aside. The young men, who should have been her future, are crushed. And the virgin daughter, who should have been protected, cherished, prepared for marriage and life, she too is trodden down. For these things I weep, my eyes flow with tears, for a comforter is far from me, one to revive my spirit. My children are desolate, for the enemy has prevailed. Zion stretches out her hands, but there is no one to comfort her. The Lord has commanded against Jacob that his neighbours should become his foes. Jerusalem has become a filthy thing among them. And again, the emphasis on the absence of comfort. 3 times in these opening verses, the poet mentions having no comforter. It's as if this is the deepest wound, not just the suffering itself, but the loneliness of it, the absence of anyone to sit beside you, to hold your hand, to say you're not alone. Jerusalem stretches out her hands, reaching, grasping, finding nothing but air. The Lord is in the right, for I have rebelled against his word. But hear, all you peoples, and see my suffering. My young women and my young men have gone into captivity. Here Jerusalem speaks in her own voice again, and she makes a startling admission. The Lord is in the right. She doesn't dispute the justice of what's happened. She acknowledges her rebellion, her failure to heed God's word. And yet, even in this acknowledgement, she pleads for witness, for recognition of her pain. Yes, she sinned. Yes, this is consequence. But it still hurts. It still matters. She is still suffering. And she asks the world to see it, to acknowledge it, not to turn away just because the suffering might be deserved. I called to my lovers, but they deceived me. My priests and elders perished in the city, while seeking food to revive their strength. See, O Lord, how distressed I am. My stomach churns. My heart is wrung within me, because I have been very rebellious. In the street, the sword bereaves. In the house, it is like death. The lovers, the allies, the nations Jerusalem had trusted, they've all proven false. And the spiritual leaders, the priests and elders who should have guided the people, they died hungry, searching desperately for food in a besieged city. The physical description of distress is visceral. The stomach churns, perhaps with hunger, perhaps with grief, perhaps with the physical response to trauma. The heart is wrung, twisted, squeezed. Outside, the sword kills. Inside, disease or starvation do the same work. There's no safe place, no refuge, nowhere to hide from death. They heard how I groan, with no one to comfort me. All my enemies heard of my trouble. They are glad that you have done it. Bring the day you have announced, and let them be as I am. Let all their evil doing come before you, and deal with them as you have dealt with me, because of all my transgressions. For my groans are many, and my heart is faint. And here, at the end of the first chapter, Jerusalem's voice becomes almost vindictive, almost desperate for others to suffer as she has suffered. She knows her enemies are celebrating, taking pleasure in her downfall, and she asks, let them experience this too. Let them know what it feels like. Bring judgment on them as you brought judgment on me. It's not noble, it's not spiritually elevated, it's raw human emotion, the cry of someone who's been hurt and wants the hurt to be fair, to be distributed, to not be hers alone. And the poet doesn't apologize for it, doesn't try to soften it. This is what grief sounds like sometimes. As we move into chapter 2, the tone shifts slightly. Where chapter 1 alternated between third-person description and Jerusalem's first-person lament, chapter 2 is dominated by the voice of the observer, the poet who watches and tries to make sense of what God has done. The language becomes, if possible, even more intense, even more focused on God's active role in Jerusalem's destruction. How the Lord in his anger has humiliated daughter Zion. He has thrown down from heaven to earth the splendor of Israel. He has not remembered his footstool in the day of his anger. The image here is staggering. God has thrown down from heaven to earth, as if Jerusalem's glory, her splendor, was something God himself is casting away, discarding. And the footstool, that's the temple, the place where God's presence dwelt, the mercy seat in the Holy of Holies, where God's feet, metaphorically, rested. In his anger, God has not remembered even this, his own dwelling place among his people. The Lord has swallowed up without mercy all the habitations of Jacob. In his wrath, he has broken down the strongholds of daughter Judah. He has brought down to the ground in dishonor the kingdom and its rulers. The verb swallowed carries the sense of devouring, consuming utterly. God is portrayed as actively destroying, not passively allowing destruction, but personally breaking down, bringing down, removing honor and protection. It's an uncomfortable portrait of God, one that modern readers often struggle with, this image of God as warrior turned against his own people, God as destroyer rather than protector. And yet the poet doesn't flinch from it. This is what has happened, and if we believe God is sovereign, then we must wrestle with his role in it. He has cut down in fierce anger all the might of Israel. He has withdrawn his right hand from them in the face of the enemy. He has burned like a flaming fire in Jacob, consuming all around. God's right hand, in biblical imagery, represents his power, his protection, his saving strength. To withdraw that hand is to remove defense, to leave Israel exposed and vulnerable. And instead of protecting, God himself has become like fire. Not the fire that warms and lights, but the fire that consumes, that destroys indiscriminately, that leaves only ash. The poet piles image upon image, each one reinforcing the central, terrible theme. God has done this. He has bent his bow like an enemy, with his right hand set like a foe. He has killed all who were delightful in our sight in the tent of daughter Zion. He has poured out his fury like fire. The imagery of God as archer, as enemy, is deeply disturbing. The bow is bent, not in their defence, but against them. The right hand, which was withdrawn in one verse, is here positioned like a foe's hand. And what is targeted? All who were delightful, the young, the beautiful, the beloved. the ones who should have been protected above all others. They are killed, and God is named as the one who killed them. This is not abstract theological language. This is accusation, testimony, an attempt to speak the unspeakable truth about what has happened. The Lord has become like an enemy. He has swallowed up Israel. He has swallowed up all its palaces. He has laid in ruins its strongholds, and he has multiplied in daughter Judah mourning and lamentation. The repetition of swallowed up reinforces the totality of the destruction. Nothing is left. The palaces, symbols of power and wealth, gone. The strongholds, places of refuge and defence, ruined. And the result is multiplication of mourning, an increase of lamentation, grief upon grief, layer upon layer of loss, until the whole nation is nothing but one long cry of sorrow. And this book, these 5 poems, they are the sound of that cry, given form, given structure, given voice. He has laid waste his booth like a garden. He has laid in ruins his meeting place. The Lord has made Zion forget festival and Sabbath, and in his fierce anger has spurned king and priest. The booth here is probably the temple again, the place of meeting between God and his people. And it's compared to a garden, something cultivated, cared for, brought to beauty, and then laid waste, destroyed, returned to wilderness. The forgetting of festival and Sabbath is particularly poignant. These were the rhythms of Israelite life, the markers of time, the gatherings that defined community and worship. Without them, time itself becomes shapeless, meaningless. And both king and priest, the 2 pillars of leadership, political and spiritual, are spurned, rejected, cast aside as useless. The Lord has scorned his altar. He has disowned his sanctuary. He has delivered into the hand of the enemy the walls of her palaces. They raised a clamour in the house of the Lord, as on the day of an appointed festival. The irony here is sharp and bitter. The temple, which should ring with songs of praise, with the joyful noise of worshippers on feast days, now echoes with the clamour of enemies, with the shouts of those who mock and destroy. The sounds are similar, loud, crowded, full of energy, but the meaning is inverted, perverted, turned into its opposite. Where there should be celebration, there is desecration. The Lord determined to lay in ruins the wall of daughter Zion. He stretched out the measuring line. He did not restrain his hand from destroying. He caused rampart and wall to lament. They languish together. The image of God stretching out a measuring line is chilling. This isn't random destruction. It's planned, measured, deliberate. God is portrayed as an architect of ruin, carefully determining how much to tear down, how thoroughly to destroy. And the walls themselves, inanimate stone, are personified as mourning their own destruction, lamenting alongside the people, languishing in shared sorrow. Her gates have sunk into the ground. He has ruined and broken her bars. Her king and princes are among the nations. The law is no more, and her prophets find no vision from the Lord. The gates that once stood proud and strong, welcoming pilgrims and merchants, have sunk down, fallen, become one with the rubble and dirt. The bars that secured them, that provided safety and protection, are ruined, broken, useless. And beyond the physical destruction, there's spiritual darkness. The law, Torah, the instruction that guided Israel's life, is no more. Not because the words have vanished, but because there's no longer a functioning community to live by them. No temple where they can be read and taught. No ordered society where they can be applied. And the prophets, who should be receiving words from the Lord, find nothing. The heavens are silent. God does not speak. And perhaps that's the most terrifying judgment of all. Not destruction, but silence. Not punishment, but absence. The elders of daughter Zion sit on the ground in silence. They have thrown dust on their heads and put on sackcloth. The young women of Jerusalem have bowed their heads to the ground. These are the traditional postures of mourning and repentance in ancient Israel. Sitting on the ground rather than on a seat or bench, a lowering of oneself, a refusing of comfort. Dust on the head, ashes, dirt, the elements of the earth. Covering the crown, dirtying the hair, marking oneself as one who grieves. Sackcloth, rough, uncomfortable fabric worn against the skin as an outward sign of inward anguish. And bowing the head, unable to look up, weighed down by sorrow. The young women especially, who should be looking forward, should be full of life and hope. They bow down, their faces to the dirt, their futures erased. My eyes are spent with weeping. My stomach churns. My bile is poured out on the ground because of the destruction of the daughter of my people, because infants and babies faint in the streets of the city. Now the poet speaks in the first person again, describing his own physical response to what he's witnessed. The eyes spent with weeping, exhausted from crying, dry and aching, the stomach churning, the bile poured out, the visceral, physical revulsion and grief that takes over the body when the mind can no longer process the horror. And the reason, the sight that breaks him, is the children. The infants and babies, the most innocent, the most vulnerable, fainting from hunger in the streets, dying where they should be playing, collapsing where they should be running and laughing. They cry to their mothers, "Where is bread and wine?" as they faint like the wounded in the streets of the city, as their life is poured out on their mother's bosom. The image is almost unbearable. Children crying out, asking their mothers for food, for drink, basic sustenance, and the mothers have nothing to give. And so the children faint, their strength draining away like the wounded soldier bleeding out in battle. Except these are not soldiers, these are babies, and the battlefield is their own city streets. And they die, not from sword wounds, but from starvation, cradled in their mother's arms, life pouring out while the mothers watch, helpless, empty-handed, broken. If there's an image in Scripture that captures the absolute nadir of human suffering, this might be it. What can I say for you? To what compare you, O daughter Jerusalem? To what can I liken you, that I may comfort you, O virgin daughter Zion? For vast as the sea is your ruin, who can heal you? The poet is at a loss for words, searching for comparison, for metaphor, for some way to frame this suffering that might make it comprehensible, that might offer some comfort. But what comparison fits? How do you measure grief this deep? He lands on the sea, vast, overwhelming, beyond human control or understanding. Your ruin is as vast as the sea. It's not a comforting image. It's an acknowledgement that comfort might not be possible, that some losses are too great for words, too deep for consolation. Who can heal you? The question hangs in the air, unanswered. Your prophets have seen for you false and deceptive visions. They have not exposed your iniquity to restore your fortunes, but have seen for you oracles that are false and misleading. And here we get a glimpse of what led to this moment. The prophets who should have spoken truth, who should have warned and corrected and called for repentance. Instead, they spoke what people wanted to hear. False visions, comforting lies, assurances that all would be well, when in fact judgment was coming. They failed in their most basic duty, and now the consequences of that failure are visible in every ruined street, every starving child, every mother weeping over a corpse. False prophecy isn't just wrong, it's deadly. All who pass along the way clap their hands at you. They hiss and wag their heads at daughter Jerusalem. Is this the city that was called the perfection of beauty, the joy of all the earth? The mockery returns, the jeering of enemies, the contempt of those who pass by. They clap, but not in applause, in derision. They hiss like serpents, they wag their heads in scorn and disbelief, and their question drips with sarcasm. This is Jerusalem? This ruin, this ash heap, this mass grave. This is the city that was once beautiful, once joyful, once the center of the world. The fall from glory to shame is complete, and the nations make sure Jerusalem knows it, feels it, can never forget it. All your enemies rail against you. They hiss, they gnash their teeth, they cry, "We have swallowed her." Ah, this is the day we longed for. Now we have seen it. The enemies aren't just mocking, they're celebrating. They rail, they hiss, they gnash teeth in savage joy. They cry out in triumph, "We have swallowed her, we have consumed her, destroyed her, and this is what we wanted. This is the day we longed for, and now it has come, and we are glad." There's a kind of pleasure in another's downfall, a dark satisfaction in seeing the mighty brought low, and the poet doesn't hide it, doesn't soften it. This is what Jerusalem faces, not just ruin, but the gleeful celebration of her enemies over that ruin. The Lord has done what he purposed. He has carried out his word, which he commanded long ago. He has thrown down without pity. He has made the enemy rejoice over you and exalted the might of your foes. And again, the insistence that this is from the Lord. This is not random, not accident, not just the fortunes of war, but the fulfillment of words spoken long ago, warnings given and ignored, covenant curses that were always waiting if Israel turned away. God has thrown down without pity. He has made the enemy rejoice. He has exalted their might. It's the opposite of what Israel expected, what they counted on. They thought God would always defend them, always protect Zion, always ensure their victory. Instead, he has given victory to their foes. Their heart cried out to the Lord. O wall of daughter Zion, let tears stream down like a torrent day and night. Give yourself no rest, your eyes no respite. Arise, cry out in the night, at the beginning of the night watches. Pour out your heart like water before the presence of the Lord. Lift your hands to him for the lives of your children, who faint for hunger at the head of every street. The imperative verbs here pile up, commanding action, crying out, arise, pour out, lift your hands. Even in the midst of overwhelming grief, there's a call to prayer, to bringing this suffering before God, to not being silent, to pleading for mercy. The comparison of tears to a torrent and of the heart poured out like water suggests a complete emptying, a holding nothing back, a rawness of petition that doesn't try to be polite or controlled. This is desperate prayer, the kind that comes when there's nothing left to lose. Look, O Lord, and see, to whom have you done this? Should women eat their children, the fruit of their womb? Should priest and prophet be killed in the sanctuary of the Lord? And now, the prayer becomes almost accusatory, almost a challenge. Look and see what you have done. Look at the result of your judgment. Women eating their children, the ultimate horror, the violation of every natural instinct. Mother love turned cannibal by the extremity of hunger. This actually happened during the siege of Jerusalem, mentioned both here and in historical accounts. It's the depth of degradation, the sign that humanity itself has broken down, that the social order has collapsed entirely, and priests and prophets killed in the sanctuary, the holy place, the one place that should have been safe, protected by God himself. The poet throws these images at God, forces him to look, to see, to acknowledge what his judgment has wrought. In the dust of the streets lie the young and the old. My young women and my young men have fallen by the sword. You have killed them in the day of your anger, slaughtering without mercy. Bodies in the streets, young and old together. No distinction, no protection for age or innocence or beauty. And again the direct accusation, you have killed them. You have slaughtered without mercy. The poet doesn't let God off the hook, doesn't find softer language, doesn't try to preserve God's reputation at the expense of truth. This is what happened, and God, you did it, and it was merciless. You summoned, as if to a festival day, my terrors on every side, and on the day of the anger of the Lord, No one escaped or survived. Those whom I held and raised my enemy destroyed. The final verse of chapter 2 returns to Jerusalem's voice, and it uses language of bitter irony. God summoned terrors as if summoning worshippers to a festival, as if the day of destruction were a feast day, a celebration. On every side the terrors came, and there was no escape, no survivor. And the final blow, those whom I held, whom I nursed, whom I raised, my children, the enemy destroyed them. And God, you let them. You made it happen. You orchestrated this day of horror that masquerades as festival. It's an ending that offers no comfort, no resolution, only the raw statement of loss and the terrible truth of God's role in it. And there, at the end of chapter 2, we pause, we breathe, we let the weight of these words settle, knowing that chapter 3 waits ahead, and with it, in the very centre of this book of grief, something will shift. Some small crack of light will appear, not to erase the darkness, but to exist alongside it, a flickering candle in a very long night. Chapter 3 is different. You feel it immediately. Where chapters 1 and 2 spoke of Jerusalem in the third person, or gave her a voice to speak of her collective suffering, chapter 3 narrows to a single voice, a single man, saying simply, I am the man who has seen affliction under the rod of his wrath. It's intimate, personal, and somehow, in its specificity, it becomes universal. This is no longer just Jerusalem's story. It's the story of anyone who has suffered, anyone who has felt the weight of divine discipline, anyone who has walked through darkness and wondered if morning would ever come. I am the man who has seen affliction under the rod of his wrath. He has driven me and brought me into darkness without any light. Surely against me he turns his hand again and again, the whole day long. The repetition of again and again captures the relentlessness of suffering, the way it doesn't come once and finish, but keeps returning, wave after wave, blow after blow, until you feel like you're drowning in it, unable to catch your breath before the next wave hits. And the darkness here is absolute. Darkness without any light, not even a glimmer, not even a distant star, just blackness pressing in from every side. He has made my flesh and my skin waste away. He has broken my bones. He has besieged and enveloped me with bitterness and tribulation. He has made me dwell in darkness like the dead of long ago. The physical imagery is visceral. Flesh and skin wasting away, the body consuming itself, growing thin, weak, fragile. Bones breaking, the internal structure collapsing, unable to support weight or movement. And then the metaphor shifts to siege, being surrounded, trapped, with bitterness and tribulation closing in like enemy armies. The darkness is equated with death, with the grave, with being among those who died long ago and have no hope of return. This is depression described in ancient poetry, the feeling of being buried alive, cut off from light and life and hope. He has walled me about so that I cannot escape. He has made my chains heavy. Though I call and cry for help, he shuts out my prayer. He has blocked my ways with blocks of stones. He has made my paths crooked. The sense of entrapment intensifies, walled in, chained, unable to escape, and worse, unheard. The prayers go up, the cries for help are offered, but they meet a closed door, a shut heaven, a God who will not listen. And the path forward, the way out, is blocked with stones, made crooked, impossible to navigate. Every avenue of hope is closed. Every potential rescue is denied. This is what it feels like when God seems absent, when suffering continues despite prayer, when the way forward disappears and you're left standing in darkness, alone. He is a bear lying in wait for me, a lion in hiding. He turned aside my steps and tore me to pieces. He has made me desolate. He bent his bow and set me as a target for his arrow. He drove into my kidneys the arrows of his quiver. I have become the laughingstock of all peoples, the object of their taunts all day long. The animal imagery is terrifying. God as predator, waiting, hiding, ready to attack. And when the attack comes, it's devastating. Torn to pieces, made desolate, used as target practice. arrows driven into the most vulnerable internal organs. The kidneys, in Hebrew, thought with a seat of emotion and conscience, the place where you feel things most deeply, and that's where God's arrows strike. Not a quick external wound, but something that pierces to the core of being. And beyond the physical or spiritual pain, there's the social dimension, being mocked, being made a laughingstock, having your suffering become entertainment for others. He has filled me with bitterness. He has sated me with wormwood. He has made my teeth grind on gravel and made me cower in ashes. My soul is bereft of peace. I have forgotten what happiness is. So I say, my endurance has perished. So has my hope from the Lord. Wormwood is a bitter plant, almost poisonous, associated with sorrow and judgment throughout Scripture. To be sated with it is to have your mouth, your stomach, your whole being filled with bitterness until you can taste nothing else. The image of teeth grinding on gravel captures both physical pain and the sense of consuming something that cannot nourish, that only damages, that breaks down rather than builds up. Cowering in ashes is the posture of mourning taken to its extreme, not just sitting in ashes, but hiding in them, trying to disappear into them. And the result is stated plainly. Peace is gone, happiness is forgotten, endurance has perished, hope from the Lord is lost. This is the bottom, the absolute nadir, the point of complete despair. Remember my affliction and my wandering, the wormwood and the gall. My soul continually remembers it and is bowed down within me. The speaker asks God to remember, to not forget, to hold in mind the depth of this suffering. And the soul's response to remembering is to bow down, to be pressed low, weighed down, unable to rise. This is the danger of memory when you're in trauma, that remembering becomes a kind of re-experiencing, and instead of processing and healing, you just sink deeper into the pain. The soul bowed down is a soul losing its fight, giving up, letting the weight win. But this I call to mind, and therefore I have hope. And here, right here at verse 21, in the exact middle of the book of Lamentations, in the centre of this acrostic poem of grief, something shifts. Not dramatically, not with trumpets and light streaming from heaven, just quietly, internally, a decision made. This I call to mind. A different kind of remembering, a choosing to think about something else, something beyond the immediate pain. And with that choice, that small turning of attention, hope appears. Not hope that has been present all along, waiting to be discovered, but hope that comes into being through the act of remembering differently, of calling to mind truths that have been obscured by suffering, but have not ceased to be true. The steadfast love of the Lord never ceases. His mercies never come to an end. They are new every morning. Great is your faithfulness. These are perhaps the most famous lines in Lamentations, quoted, sung, turned into hymns, claimed as promises by generations of believers. And it's stunning that they appear here, in this context, in the middle of this dark book, spoken by this man who has just catalogued his suffering in the most painful detail. He doesn't deny what he's been through. He doesn't pretend it wasn't that bad. He doesn't spiritually bypass his own grief. He looks at it, names it, and then, in the same breath, he remembers this. God's love does not cease. God's mercies do not end. And they are renewed every single morning. Every dawn is a fresh start, a new beginning, a testament to God's faithfulness. The Lord is my portion, says my soul. Therefore I will hope in him. The Lord is good to those who wait for him, to the soul who seeks him. It is good that one should wait quietly for the salvation of the Lord. The language here is deliberate, personal, owned. My soul says this. Not the voice of the community, not the echo of liturgy, but my own soul, speaking for itself, claiming God as its portion, its inheritance, its share. And the response to this claiming is hope, and the call is to waiting, to seeking, to quiet patience for salvation that has not yet arrived, but will come, must come, because God is good, God is faithful, and that faithfulness does not depend on our circumstances, but on God's character. It is good for a man that he bear the yoke in his youth. Let him sit alone in silence when it is laid on him. Let him put his mouth in the dust. There may yet be hope. Let him give his cheek to the one who strikes him. Let him be filled with insults. These verses are difficult, almost uncomfortable. They seem to counsel acceptance of suffering, submission to it, even finding good in it, bearing the yoke in youth. The idea that early hardship builds character, teaches endurance, prepares you for what's ahead. Sitting alone in silence, not raging against suffering but being with it, allowing it, not fighting every moment. Putting the mouth in the dust, the ultimate gesture of humility, of surrender. And in that surrender, finding that there may yet be hope, offering the cheek to the striker, accepting insult without retaliation, being filled with mockery and not striking back. It sounds like passivity, like giving up, like letting suffering win. But perhaps it's something else. Perhaps it's the recognition that some suffering cannot be fought, only endured. And that in the enduring, in the refusing to become bitter and vengeful, in the maintaining of human dignity, even when treated without dignity, there is a kind of victory that looks like defeat but isn't. For the Lord will not cast off forever, but though he cause grief, he will have compassion according to the abundance of his steadfast love. For he does not afflict from his heart, or grieve the children of men. Here is the theological centre of the book, the answer to the question that has been hanging in the air since chapter 1. Is God cruel? Does he delight in our suffering? Does he afflict because he wants to, because it pleases him? And the answer is no. No, he does not cast off forever. No, he does not afflict from his heart, not from his core, not from his essential nature. Though he causes grief, and the poet does not deny that he does, he will have compassion, and that compassion flows from his steadfast love, which is abundant, overflowing, more than enough. God's grief over our grief is real. His discipline comes not from cruelty, but from love, from the desire to restore, to correct, to bring his people back to himself, to crush underfoot all the prisoners of the earth, to deny a man justice in the presence of the Most High, to subvert a man in his lawsuit. The Lord does not approve. Who has spoken and it came to pass, unless the Lord has commanded it? Is it not from the mouth of the Most High that good and bad come? Why should a living man complain, a man, about his punishment for his sins? These verses acknowledge that injustice exists, that people are crushed, denied justice, subverted in their legal claims, and the Lord does not approve of these things. There's a moral order, a standard of right and wrong, and God holds to it even when humans don't. And yet, sovereignty remains. Nothing happens unless the Lord commands it or allows it. Both good and bad come from God's mouth, not in the sense that God is the author of evil, but in the sense that nothing occurs outside his ultimate control and purpose. And therefore the question, why should we complain? If we're experiencing the punishment for our sins, if this is consequence and not random tragedy, what grounds do we have for complaint? It's a hard word, an uncomfortable word, but it's spoken not to silence grief but to reframe it, to help us see our suffering in the larger context of God's justice and mercy. Let us test and examine our ways and return to the Lord. Let us lift up our hearts and hands to God in heaven. We have transgressed and rebelled, and you have not forgiven. The call here is to self-examination, to testing our ways, looking honestly at how we've lived, where we've failed, and then turning back to the Lord. The physical gesture, lifting up hearts and hands, suggests openness, vulnerability, offering ourselves to God without defense or excuse. And the confession is simple and stark. We have transgressed, we have rebelled, and you have not forgiven. Not yet, not fully. The consequences continue, which means the forgiveness, while perhaps offered, has not yet manifested in the removal of suffering. And so the prayer continues. You have wrapped yourself with anger and pursued us, killing without pity. You have wrapped yourself with a cloud so that no prayer can pass through. You have made us scum and garbage among the peoples. The imagery returns to God's active role in judgment. He wrapped himself with anger like a garment, covered himself with it, and pursued his people like an enemy. He wrapped himself with a cloud, becoming hidden, unreachable. And that cloud blocks prayer, prevents access, keeps the cries from getting through. And he has allowed or caused his people to be viewed as scum, as garbage, as refuse, the lowest status possible among the nations. It's humiliating, degrading, and deeply painful. And the poet doesn't try to soften it or explain it away. This is the experience, and it must be named. All our enemies open their mouths against us. Panic and pitfall have come upon us, devastation and destruction. My eyes flow with rivers of tears because of the destruction of the daughter of my people. The speaker returns to the personal, to his own response to collective suffering. His eyes flow not with tears, but with rivers of tears, an endless stream, an overflow that cannot be stopped or dried up. This is not crying that brings relief. This is crying that exhausts, that depletes, that seems it will never end, because the cause of the crying continues unabated. My eyes will flow without ceasing, without respite, until the Lord from heaven looks down and sees. My eyes cause me grief at the fate of all the daughters of my city. The determination here is almost stubborn. I will weep without ceasing, without respite, until God looks, until God sees, until God responds. It's an act of persistence, of refusing to stop bringing the suffering before God, of insisting on his attention. And the cause of grief is specific. The fate of the daughters of the city, the young women who should be safe, protected, full of future and promise, but instead are caught up in destruction, in famine, in assault, in death. I have been hunted like a bird by those who were my enemies without cause. They flung me alive into the pit and cast stones on me. Water closed over my head. I said, I am lost. The imagery shifts to hunting, to being pursued, trapped, thrown into a pit, which in ancient thought often represented Sheol, the realm of the dead. And not just thrown in, but having stones cast on top, as if to seal the tomb, to make sure there's no escape. And then water, drowning, suffocating, the life being pressed out. And the conclusion seems inescapable. I am lost. I am cut off. I am finished. This is what it feels like in the depths of depression, of despair, of trauma. You feel hunted, trapped, buried, drowning, and utterly convinced that this is the end, that there is no way out, that you are lost beyond recovery. I called on your name, O Lord, from the depths of the pit. You heard my voice. Do not close your ear to my cry for help, to my plea for relief. You came near when I called on you. You said, do not fear. And here, the turn, the rescue, described simply, almost quietly. From the depths of the pit, the place of death and despair, a cry goes up, and God hears it. More than hears, he responds. He comes near, close, personal, intimate, and he speaks one simple word: do not fear. Not, your suffering is over. Not, here is the explanation. Not, everything will be fine now. Just, do not fear. I am here. You are not alone. That is enough. In that moment, in the pit, it is enough. You have taken up my cause, O Lord. You have redeemed my life. You have seen the wrong done to me, O Lord. Judge my cause. You have seen all their vengeance, all their plots against me. The shift from despair to confidence is remarkable. God has taken up the cause, become the advocate, the defender. He has redeemed life, brought it back, rescued it from the pit. And he has seen, truly seen, the wrong that has been done, and the speaker asks for judgment, for justice, for vindication. There's trust here, trust that God knows, that God cares, that God will act. You have heard their taunts, O Lord, all their plots against me. The lips and thoughts of my assailants are against me all the day. Behold their sitting and their rising. I am the object of their taunts. You will repay them, O Lord, according to the work of their hands. You will give them dullness of heart. Your curse will be on them. You will pursue them in anger and destroy them from under your heavens, O Lord. The prayer becomes a call for vengeance, for God to repay the enemies according to their deeds, to give them a dull heart, unable to understand or repent, to curse them, to pursue them in anger, to destroy them utterly. It's not a prayer we're comfortable with in modern Christianity, this asking God to hurt our enemies, to punish them, to wipe them out. But it's honest. It's what the heart wants in the moment of pain. And perhaps part of bringing it to God, of praying it, rather than acting on it, is allowing God to be the judge, to be the one who determines what justice looks like, rather than taking vengeance into our own hands. The speaker entrusts judgment to God, and in that entrusting finds some measure of release. Chapter 4 returns to the third-person description of Jerusalem's suffering, but now with an even more pronounced emphasis on the depth of degradation, on how far the mighty have fallen, on the contrast between what was and what is, how the gold has grown dim, how the pure gold is changed. The holy stones lie scattered at the head of every street, the precious sons of Zion, worth their weight in fine gold, how they are regarded as earthen pots, the work of a potter's hands. Gold growing dim, losing its lustre, its value, its beauty. Pure gold, changed, debased, made common. Holy stones, perhaps the stones of the temple, scattered in the streets like rubble, like trash, no longer set apart, no longer precious. And the people, the precious sons of Zion, once valued as gold, now regarded as cheap pottery, breakable, replaceable, worthless. The fall from honour to shame is complete. Even jackals offer the breast, they nurse their young, but the daughter of my people has become cruel like the ostriches in the wilderness. The comparison is striking and terrible. Even wild animals, jackals, care for their young, nurse them, protect them. But Jerusalem, the daughter of God's people, has become like ostriches, which in ancient belief were thought to abandon their eggs, to be careless with their offspring, to lack maternal instinct. The implication is that the suffering has been so severe, the famine so devastating, that natural affection has been destroyed, that mothers can no longer care for their children because there is nothing to give, no food, no milk, no strength, no hope. The tongue of the nursing infant sticks to the roof of its mouth for thirst. The children beg for food, but no one gives to them. Those who once feasted on delicacies perish in the streets. Those who were brought up in purple embrace ash heaps. The images pile up, each one more heartbreaking than the last. Infants so thirsty their tongues stick, unable to cry, unable to nurse, dying slowly of dehydration. Children begging for food that doesn't exist, that no one has to give. The wealthy, who once ate the finest foods, now dying in the streets. The nobility, who wore purple, the colour of royalty, now embracing ash heaps, lying in garbage, reduced to the lowest state imaginable. Every social distinction, every marker of status and privilege has been erased by the common experience of suffering. For the chastisement of the daughter of my people has been greater than the punishment of Sodom, which was overthrown in a moment, and no hands were wrung for her. The comparison to Sodom is significant. Sodom was destroyed utterly, fire and brimstone from heaven, complete annihilation in a moment. But the poet says, Jerusalem's chastisement is worse, greater, more severe. Why? Because Sodom's end was quick. No one had to watch loved ones starve slowly. No one had to endure siege and famine and the gradual breakdown of all social order. Jerusalem's suffering is prolonged, drawn out, a slow death that allows time for every horror to be experienced, every degradation to be felt. And so the hands are wrung. The suffering is active and conscious, not the mercy of quick destruction, but the agony of slow collapse. Her princes were purer than snow, whiter than milk. Their bodies were more ruddy than coral. The beauty of their form was like sapphire. Now their appearance is blacker than soot. They are not recognized in the streets. Their skin has shriveled on their bones. It has become as dry as wood. The contrast is visual and visceral. These leaders, these nobles, once beautiful, healthy, glowing with vitality, skin clear and bright, bodies strong and well fed. Now they're unrecognizable, blackened by starvation or disease, skin shriveled, clinging to bones, all moisture gone, all life drained away. They look like corpses walking, like skeletons with skin stretched over them, and no one can tell who they are, so completely has suffering transformed them. Happier were the victims of the sword than the victims of hunger, who wasted away, pierced by lack of the fruits of the field. Another terrible calculation. Better to die by the sword, quick and clean, than to die of starvation, a death that takes weeks, that steals your humanity piece by piece, that makes you watch yourself waste away, that reduces you to an animal searching desperately for anything to eat, anything to stave off the gnawing emptiness just one more day. The poet says the sword victims were happier, more blessed, because their suffering ended quickly. Those dying of hunger have to endure and endure and endure until finally the body gives out. The hands of compassionate women have boiled their own children. They became their food during the destruction of the daughter of my people. And here we return to the most unspeakable horror, the thing that represents absolute rock bottom, the complete breakdown of every human norm and instinct. Compassionate women, mothers whose very nature is to protect and nurture, boiling their own children to eat them. This is not metaphor. This actually happened during the siege, recorded in historical accounts, mentioned here and in other biblical texts. It's the ultimate violation, the final proof that the suffering has exceeded human capacity to endure, that people have been driven past the limits of what we think possible, into territory where survival itself becomes monstrous. The poet doesn't dwell on it, doesn't elaborate, just states it plainly and moves on. Because what more can be said? What words are adequate to this reality? The Lord gave full vent to his wrath. He poured out his hot anger, and he kindled a fire in Zion that consumed its foundations. The kings of the earth did not believe, nor any of the inhabitants of the world, that foe or enemy could enter the gates of Jerusalem. The emphasis returns to God's agency, his wrath given full vent, his anger poured out, his fire kindled, consuming down to the very foundations, to the bedrock, to the core of what made Zion, Zion. And the reason this is so shocking, so unbelievable, is that Jerusalem was thought to be impregnable, protected by God himself. The nations believed Zion could not fall, that its gates could never be breached by enemy forces. And yet here we are, standing in the ruins, proof that what seemed impossible has happened, that divine protection was withdrawn, that the unthinkable became reality. This was for the sins of her prophets and the iniquities of her priests, who shed in the midst of her the blood of the righteous. The explanation, offered plainly, this happened because of the sins of the religious leaders, the prophets and priests who should have been shepherds but became predators, who shed innocent blood, who led the people astray, who cared more for their own power and comfort than for justice and truth. The responsibility is placed squarely on those who should have known better, who had the word of God, who were supposed to teach and guide and protect, and instead corrupted and destroyed. They wandered, blind, through the streets. They were so defiled with blood that no one was able to touch their garments. "Away, unclean," people cried at them. "Away, away, do not touch." So they became fugitives and wanderers. Among the nations, people said, "They shall stay with us no longer." The very leaders who caused this disaster now wander as outcasts, ritually unclean from the blood they shed, avoided by everyone, rejected by their own people, unwelcome among the nations where they seek refuge. They have lost everything: home, status, purity, acceptance. They wander without place, without purpose, without hope of return. Their judgment is both spiritual and social, both internal and external, a complete severing from community and from God. The Lord himself has scattered them. he will regard them no more. No honour was shown to the priests, no favour to the elders. Our eyes failed, ever watching vainly for help. In our watching, we watched for a nation which could not save. The statement is final and devastating. God himself has scattered them, removed his regard, his attention, his favour. And the people waited, watched, hoped for help from other nations, alliances, political solutions, military aid, and it never came. The watching was vain, empty, futile. The nation they watched for could not save, did not save, and so Jerusalem fell while her people stared at the horizon, hoping for rescue that would never arrive. They dogged our steps so that we could not walk in our streets. Our end drew near. Our days were numbered, for our end had come. Our pursuers were swifter than the eagles in the heavens. They chased us on the mountains. They lay in wait for us in the wilderness. The breath of our nostrils, the Lord's anointed, was captured in their pits, of whom we said, "Under his shadow we shall live among the nations." The pursuers, the Babylonian army, were relentless, swift as eagles, tracking them everywhere, in the streets, on the mountains, in the wilderness. No place was safe, no refuge existed. And even the king, the Lord's anointed, the one in whom they had placed their hope, he was captured, taken prisoner. The shadow under which they thought they could live, gone. Every layer of protection, every source of hope, stripped away until there was nothing left but naked reality. We have fallen. We are conquered. We are finished. Rejoice and be glad, O daughter of Edom, you who dwell in the land of Uz. But to you also the cup shall pass. You shall become drunk and strip yourself bare. The punishment of your iniquity, O daughter of Zion, is accomplished. He will keep you in exile no longer. But your iniquity, O daughter of Edom, he will punish. He will uncover your sins. And now a turn toward Edom, the neighbouring nation that rejoiced in Jerusalem's fall, that participated in the destruction, that betrayed kinship for the opportunity to loot and mock. The poet says, "Rejoice now, be glad now, because your turn is coming." The cup of God's wrath, which Jerusalem has drunk to the dregs, will be passed to you next. You too will be drunk with judgment. You too will be stripped and shamed. Jerusalem's punishment is almost finished, accomplished, and she will not remain in exile forever. But Edom, your punishment is coming. Your sins will be uncovered, and you will know what Jerusalem has known. It's a prophecy of reversal, of justice deferred but not denied, of the tables turning in God's time. Chapter 5 shifts in form. It's no longer an acrostic. The carefully structured alphabet is abandoned, and in its place is a raw, direct prayer, a communal lament addressed to God, asking him to remember, to look, to see what has befallen his people. Remember, O Lord, what has befallen us. Look and see our disgrace. Our inheritance has been turned over to strangers, our homes to foreigners. We have become orphans, fatherless. Our mothers are like widows. The prayer begins with a plea for remembrance, for God to hold in his mind the reality of what has happened. The inheritance, the promised land, the homes, all taken by strangers, by foreigners, by those who have no claim, no right. And the social structure has collapsed. Orphans and widows, the most vulnerable in ancient society, are what everyone has become, without protection, without provision, without hope of justice. We must pay for the water we drink. The wood we get must be bought. Our pursuers are at our necks. We are weary. We are given no rest. We have given the hand to Egypt and to Assyria to get bread enough. Even basic necessities, water and firewood, things that should be freely available, must now be purchased, paid for. Is anything left to pay with? The pursuers are at their necks, breathing down on them, constant threat, constant pressure. Weariness has become the permanent state, and rest, that deep biblical concept of shalom, of peace and wholeness and safety, is utterly absent. And in desperation, they've reached out to the very nations that were once enemies, Egypt and Assyria, begging for bread, willing to submit, to give the hand in vassalage, just to survive. Our fathers sinned and are no more, and we bear their iniquities. Slaves rule over us. There is none to deliver us from their hand. We get our bread at the peril of our lives because of the sword in the wilderness. Our skin is hot as an oven with the burning heat of famine. The acknowledgement that this is generational, that they are bearing the consequences of their fathers' sins, suffering for failures not entirely their own, and yet recognizing that they too have sinned, they too have failed. And the indignity of being ruled by slaves, by those who should be beneath them in the social order, another inversion, another sign of complete disruption. Getting bread is dangerous, life-threatening. Every attempt to find food risks death by sword or by the famine itself, which burns in the skin like an oven, fever from starvation, from disease, from the breakdown of the body. Women are raped in Zion, young women in the towns of Judah. Princes are hung up by their hands. No respect is shown to the elders. Young men are compelled to grind at the mill, and boys stagger under loads of wood. The old men have left the city gate, the young men their music. Sexual violence, the ultimate violation. Women raped in the holy city, in the towns throughout the land. Leaders executed in humiliating ways, hung up by their hands, displayed as warnings, as objects of mockery. Elders shown no respect, their wisdom dismissed, their authority gone. Young men forced into grinding grain, women's work, degrading labour. Boys, children, made to carry burdens too heavy for them, staggering under the weight. And the places of community life, the city gate where elders used to sit and judge, the places where young men gathered to play music, all abandoned, all silent. The social fabric has been completely torn apart. The joy of our hearts has ceased. Our dancing has been turned to mourning. The crown has fallen from our head. Woe to us, for we have sinned. For this our heart has become sick. For these things our eyes have grown dim. For Mount Zion, which lies desolate, with jackals prowling over it. Joy, that essential quality of life with God, has ceased. Dancing, celebration, festival, all turned to mourning. The crown, symbol of honour, glory, election, has fallen, lost. And the confession, woe to us, for we have sinned. The heart is sick, not with physical disease, but with grief, with the weight of recognition, with the horror of consequence. Eyes grow dim, perhaps from weeping, perhaps from the loss of hope, perhaps from the simple exhaustion of too much suffering. And Mount Zion, the holy mountain, God's dwelling place, lies empty, desolate, prowled over by wild animals where priests once walked and worshippers gathered. But you, O Lord, reign forever. Your throne endures to all generations. Why do you forget us forever? Why do you forsake us for so many days? Restore us to yourself, O Lord, that we may be restored. Renew our days as of old, unless you have utterly rejected us, and you remain exceedingly angry with us. And here, in these final verses, the prayer reaches its climax. First, the affirmation of faith. You, O Lord, reign forever. Your throne endures. You are still God, still sovereign, still seated in authority, regardless of what has happened to us. And then the questions, the raw, painful questions that flow from that faith. If you reign, why do you forget us? If your throne endures, why does your favour not endure to us? Why this forsaking that goes on for so many days, so much time, so long that it feels eternal, even though we know you are eternal and we are not? And then the plea, simple and desperate. Restore us. Bring us back to yourself. Let us return. Renew our days. Make them like they were before, like they were of old, when we were in relationship with you, when things were right, when there was hope and joy and peace. And then, chillingly, the prayer ends with doubt, with uncertainty, with a question left hanging in the air. Unless you have utterly rejected us, unless your anger remains exceedingly great, unless there is no restoration coming, no renewal, no return. The book ends not with resolution, but with suspended hope, with prayer offered but not yet answered, with faith maintained but not yet rewarded. And that's where we stop, at the end of chapter 5, with the people waiting, wondering, hoping, fearing, standing in the ruins and looking up to the throne that endures forever, asking to be seen, to be remembered, to be restored, and not yet hearing the answer they long for. So we've walked through all 5 chapters of Lamentations now. We've sat in the ruins with the poet. We've heard Jerusalem's voice crying out. We've listened to the man who saw affliction. We've witnessed the horror and the grief and the questions that have no easy answers. And you might be wondering, what do we do with this? How does a book this dark, this honest about suffering, this unflinching in its portrayal of judgment and loss, how does this become something that comforts us, that helps us rest, that speaks to us across the centuries? Let's sit with that question for a while. Let's explore what Lamentations teaches us, not just about ancient Jerusalem, but about grief itself, about God, about hope in the midst of despair. First, Lamentations teaches us that grief must be expressed, not suppressed. In our modern world, we're often uncomfortable with raw emotion, with the kind of unfiltered sorrow that we find in these 5 chapters. We want grief to be tidy, to have stages that move in order, to resolve itself quickly so we can get back to normal. We use phrases like closure and moving on, as if grief were a task to be completed, a box to be checked. But Lamentations refuses that narrative. It sits in the grief, wallows in it, explores every dimension of it, gives it full voice and full permission to be exactly as overwhelming and messy and painful as it actually is. The poet doesn't rush to comfort. He doesn't immediately jump to the silver lining, or the lesson learned, or the reason why this had to happen. He lets the suffering be sufficient unto itself. He catalogues the losses, names the pain, describes the horrors in detail that might make us squeamish. And there's something profoundly healthy about this, something we desperately need to recover in our grief-averse culture. Because the truth is, some losses are so great that they cannot be quickly processed. Some wounds so deep that they don't heal on anyone's timetable but their own. And when we try to rush through grief, when we try to skip the lament and go straight to the praise, we often just bury the pain, push it down where it festers and grows toxic, rather than allowing it to be brought into the light, examined, felt, expressed, and eventually, in God's time, transformed. Lamentations gives us permission to grieve fully. It tells us that it's okay to cry rivers of tears, to feel like we're drowning, to struggle to find words, to question God, to lay our pain before Him without prettying it up or spiritualizing it, or pretending it's not as bad as it is. The Psalms do this too, of course. Many of the Psalms are laments, cries of distress, questions hurled at heaven. But Lamentations is 5 whole chapters, an entire book, dedicated to the proposition that grief deserves space, deserves time, deserves to be heard and witnessed and taken seriously. If you're in a season of grief right now, if you're walking through loss or suffering or circumstances that feel overwhelming, Lamentations says to you, what you're feeling is real, it's valid, it matters, and you don't have to rush through it to make other people comfortable. Sit with it, name it, bring it to God. He can handle your honest pain. Second, Lamentations teaches us that suffering is often connected to consequences, but that doesn't make it less painful or less deserving of compassion. This is a delicate balance, and one that's easy to get wrong. Throughout the book, the poet insists that Jerusalem's suffering is the result of her sin, her rebellion, her failure to keep covenant with God. This is not random tragedy. This is judgment, discipline, the working out of cause and effect in the moral universe. And that's an important theological truth. Actions have consequences. When we turn away from God, when we choose injustice over justice, when we worship other gods or oppress the vulnerable, or ignore the warnings of prophets sent to call us back. There are results, and those results are often painful. But here's what Lamentations doesn't do. It doesn't use that theological truth as a reason to minimize the pain or to withhold compassion. The poet never says, "Well, you deserved this, so stop complaining." He never says, "This is your fault, so you have no right to grieve." Instead, he grieves with the people. He sits in their pain. He describes their suffering with tenderness and detail. He pleads with God to see and remember and restore. He holds both truths at once. This is consequence, and it still hurts unbearably. This is just, and it still requires mercy. This is deserved, and compassion is still needed. We need this balance desperately, both in how we view our own suffering and in how we respond to others. On one hand, we need to be honest about sin and consequence, about the ways our choices and our corporate failures lead to pain, both for ourselves and for others. Ignoring that connection doesn't help anyone. It leaves us powerless to change, unable to learn, doomed to repeat the same destructive patterns. But on the other hand, we need to resist the temptation to use someone's sin as a reason to withhold compassion from their suffering. The friend who's going through a divorce because of their own infidelity still needs support. The family member who's suffering health consequences from years of poor choices still deserves care. The community experiencing the fallout of their own corporate injustice still requires help and hope. Lamentations shows us how to hold this tension. It doesn't deny responsibility, but it also doesn't use responsibility as a club to beat people with. It says, yes, we sinned, and yes, we're suffering, and both of those things are true, and we still need God's mercy. We still cry out for restoration. We still hope for a future beyond this consequence. If you're suffering the results of your own choices, Lamentations tells you that you're not disqualified from God's compassion. Bring your grief to Him, own your part, and trust that the God who disciplines is also the God whose mercies are new every morning. Third, Lamentations teaches us that hope is not the absence of despair, but the stubborn choosing of truth in the midst of despair. This might be the most important lesson of the whole book. Because if you read Lamentations looking for a happy ending, you're going to be disappointed. The book ends with questions, with uncertainty, with the people still in exile, still suffering, still waiting for restoration that hasn't yet come. There's no resolution, no neat bow tied on the package, no voice from heaven saying, everything's going to be okay now. And yet, right in the middle of the book, in the darkest moment, there's that turn, that pivot, that small, flickering flame of hope. This I call to mind, and therefore I have hope. It's not that circumstances have changed. They haven't. It's not that the suffering has ended. It continues. It's not even that God has spoken, shown up in some tangible way to reassure the sufferer. He hasn't. What's changed is what the speaker chooses to remember, to call to mind, to focus on. And what he remembers is God's character. The steadfast love of the Lord never ceases. His mercies never come to an end. They are new every morning. Great is your faithfulness. This is not positive thinking. This is not toxic optimism that denies reality. The speaker has just spent 40 verses cataloguing his affliction in the most graphic detail. He hasn't forgotten the pain. He hasn't pretended things are fine. But he's made a choice to remember something else alongside the pain. Something true about God that doesn't depend on circumstances, that doesn't change based on how he feels or what he's experiencing. This is what biblical hope looks like. Not naive belief that everything will work out the way we want. Not denial of present suffering. Not even confidence that relief is coming soon. Biblical hope is the decision to believe what God has said about himself, even when experience seems to contradict it. It's the choice to trust in God's character, his steadfast love, his faithfulness, his mercy, even when we can't see evidence of those things in our immediate circumstances. It's the stubborn clinging to truth when everything in us wants to give in to despair. And here's the beautiful, mysterious thing. That act of remembering, that choosing to hope, doesn't fix everything, but it does something. It creates space for endurance. It makes it possible to keep going. It prevents despair from having the final word. The man in Lamentations 3 is still suffering at the end of his poem, but he hasn't been destroyed by it. He hasn't lost his faith. He's still there, still waiting, still hoping, because he chose to remember, because he called to mind what was true about God, even when it didn't feel true. If you're in a dark place, if despair is pressing in, if you can't see any way forward, you can do what the poet did. You can choose, deliberately, intentionally, to remember what is true about God. Not to deny your pain, but to hold truth alongside it. His love doesn't cease. His mercies don't end. They're new every morning. Not because you feel it, but because it's his nature. And that truth, remembered and clung to, can be enough to carry you through one more day. Fourth, Lamentations teaches us that God is big enough to handle our anger, our accusations, our hardest questions. One of the most striking features of this book is how directly it speaks to and about God, how unflinching it is in naming God's role in the suffering. The poet doesn't soften it, doesn't use passive voice, doesn't hide behind secondary causes. God has done this. God has torn down. God has killed. God has withdrawn his hand. God has wrapped himself in cloud. God has made us suffer. These are bold, even shocking statements, and they're offered not as theological propositions, but as accusations, as cries of pain, as demands for explanation. And here's what's remarkable. This book is in the Bible. These prayers, these questions, these accusations, they're scripture. They're part of the inspired, authoritative Word of God, which means God himself has validated this kind of honest, raw, even angry prayer. He said, yes, you can talk to me like this. Yes, you can bring me your hardest questions. Yes, you can name your pain and even accuse me of causing it, and I won't strike you down. I won't reject you. I won't tell you to be quiet and accept it without complaint. Instead, I'll preserve your words. I'll include them in my holy book. I'll let generations of my people read them and find their own voices in yours. Too often we approach God with a kind of false reverence, thinking we have to clean ourselves up before we come, thinking we can only bring him our nice feelings and our polite prayers. We're afraid that if we tell him how we really feel, if we voice our doubts or our anger or our sense of betrayal, he'll punish us or abandon us or be disappointed in us. But Lamentations shows us a different way. It shows us that God invites honesty, that he can handle our strongest emotions, that he'd rather have our real, messy, angry prayers than our fake, polished, pretend ones. He knows what we're feeling anyway. Trying to hide it from him doesn't protect him or us. It just creates distance, puts up walls, prevents real relationship. Job knew this. Job argued with God, questioned him, demanded answers, accused him of injustice. And at the end of the book, God says to Job's friends, "You have not spoken of me what is right, as my servant Job has." Job's raw honesty was more pleasing to God than his friends' tidy theology. The psalmists knew this too. They wrote things like, "Why do you hide your face? Why do you forget our affliction? Awake, O Lord, why do you sleep? How long, O Lord, will you forget me forever?" These aren't reverent, submissive prayers. They're cries of distress that border on accusation, and they're in Scripture, preserved as models for how we can pray. So if you're angry at God right now, tell him. If you feel betrayed, say so. If you don't understand why he's allowed this thing to happen, ask him. Don't hide your real feelings behind spiritual-sounding language. Don't pretend you're okay when you're not. Bring him the truth of your heart. even if that truth is ugly or sounds unfaithful. He's not fragile. He's not threatened by your questions. He's not going to abandon you for being honest. In fact, that honesty might be the very thing that keeps you connected to him through the darkness, because at least you're still talking, still engaging, still in relationship, even if that relationship is currently one of struggle and wrestling and hard questions. Fifth, Lamentations teaches us that community in suffering matters. While much of the book is individual lament, the voice of one person, or Jerusalem personified, it's also deeply communal. These poems were written to be read aloud, to be prayed together, to give voice to corporate grief. The Jewish community has read Lamentations publicly every year on Tisha B'Av, the 9th of Av, the day that commemorates the destruction of both the first and second temples, along with other tragedies in Jewish history. Gathering to read these poems together, to name the suffering together, to grieve together, is part of how the community processes loss and maintains connection to their history and to each other. We need this too. Western culture, especially American culture, is deeply individualistic. We're taught to handle our problems on our own, to be strong, to not burden others with our pain. And while there's value in personal responsibility and resilience, there's also great danger in isolation. Grief carried alone becomes crushing. Suffering endured in silence becomes toxic. We need each other, need to be able to name our pain in community, to have it witnessed and acknowledged and held by others who care. Lamentations gives us a model for this. It shows us how to lament together, how to speak the truth about suffering in ways that others can hear and enter into, how to create space for corporate grief. When we gather to pray, we don't always have to be celebrating. Sometimes we need to gather to mourn. Sometimes we need to read Lamentations together, or similar texts, and let them give voice to losses we're experiencing as a community. Sometimes we need to simply sit together in silence, acknowledging that words aren't enough, but presence is something. If you're suffering, please don't try to do it alone. Find people who will sit with you, who won't try to fix it or minimize it or rush you through it, who will simply be present, who will let you grieve, who will hold space for your pain. And if someone you love is suffering, be that person for them. Don't offer easy answers or cheap comfort. Don't quote Romans 8:28 and expect that to solve everything. Just show up, sit with them, listen, bear witness. Let them know they're not alone. That's what the Book of Lamentations does. It sits with the suffering and says, I see you, I'm here, your pain is real and it matters. Sixth, Lamentations teaches us that waiting is a spiritual discipline. The book ends with waiting, with prayer offered but not yet answered, with hope expressed but not yet fulfilled. Restore us to yourself, O Lord, that we may be restored. It's a plea, a petition, a longing. And it hangs there, suspended, because when Lamentations was written, the restoration hadn't happened yet. The exile continued. The temple lay in ruins. The people were still scattered. They were waiting, and they had no idea how long that waiting would last. As it turned out, it lasted 70 years, 2 generations. Most of the people who went into exile never saw the return. They died waiting. We don't like waiting. We live in a culture of instant gratification, of same-day delivery, of immediate answers at our fingertips. We're not good at patience, at enduring delay, at living in the tension between promise and fulfillment. But so much of the life of faith is waiting. Abraham waited 25 years for the promised son. Joseph waited years in prison before his dreams came true. The Israelites waited 400 years in Egypt before the Exodus. Israel waited centuries for the Messiah. And we wait now, in this already but not yet time, for Christ's return, for the restoration of all things, for the new heavens and new earth where death and mourning and crying and pain will be no more. Lamentations teaches us how to wait faithfully, not passively, not with resignation, but with hope grounded in God's character. The Lord is good to those who wait for him, to the soul who seeks him. It is good that one should wait quietly for the salvation of the Lord. Waiting quietly doesn't mean not feeling the pain or not expressing the longing. It means not letting impatience turn into despair, not letting delay destroy trust, not giving up on God just because he doesn't move on our timeline. It means continuing to hope, to pray, to seek, even when we can't see progress, even when it feels like nothing's changing, even when we're tired and discouraged and tempted to quit. If you're in a season of waiting right now, if you're praying for something that hasn't come, if you're longing for change or healing or breakthrough that hasn't arrived, Lamentations says, keep waiting, keep hoping, keep seeking. Not because you can see how it's going to work out, but because God is faithful, because his love never ceases, because his mercies are new every morning. Your waiting is not wasted. It's forming something in you. Patience, endurance, deeper trust, stronger hope. And when the answer finally comes, whether in this life or the next, you'll see that the waiting was part of the story, part of how God was working, part of the journey that led you to where you needed to be. Seventh, Lamentations teaches us that God's discipline is an expression of love, not rejection. This is perhaps the hardest truth in the book, the one we most want to resist. We see the suffering and we recoil. We hear that God caused it and we're offended. How can a loving God do this to his people? How can discipline that results in starvation and death and exile be anything other than cruelty? But the poet insists, and the larger biblical narrative confirms, that God's discipline of Israel was not rejection, but the painful work of a father who refuses to abandon his children to their self-destruction. Think about it this way. God had been sending prophets to Israel for generations, warning them, pleading with them, calling them back to covenant faithfulness. Isaiah, Jeremiah, Hosea, Amos, Micah, so many voices crying out, turn back, change your ways, care for the poor, stop worshipping idols, remember who you are and whose you are. And the people, by and large, didn't listen. They kept going their own way, pursuing their own gods, oppressing the vulnerable, trusting in their own power and their own alliances rather than in the Lord. And what was God supposed to do? Just let it go? Just watch his people destroy themselves and do nothing? The discipline that came, as terrible as it was a last resort, a breaking point, a moment when God said, if you won't turn back through gentle means, then maybe suffering will wake you up. Maybe loss will bring you to your senses. Maybe exile will teach you what prosperity couldn't. And it worked, actually. The exile changed Israel. They never worshipped idols again after that. They developed a deep reverence for Torah, a commitment to God's word that sustained them through centuries of dispersion. They learned, painfully, that God meant what he said, that covenant had consequences, that you couldn't play games with the Holy One of Israel. The New Testament picks up this theme. Hebrews 12 talks about God's discipline as proof of his love, as the mark of being a true son rather than an illegitimate child. It says, "The Lord disciplines the one he loves and chastises every son whom he receives." For the moment, all discipline seems painful rather than pleasant, but later it yields the peaceful fruit of righteousness to those who have been trained by it. God's discipline is not punishment for punishment's sake. It's training, formation, the painful process of becoming who we're meant to be. If you're experiencing what feels like God's discipline right now, if you're facing consequences of your own choices, or if you're going through suffering that seems to have a corrective purpose, please hear this. It doesn't mean God has rejected you. It might mean the opposite, that he loves you too much to let you continue on a destructive path, that he's willing to allow pain now to prevent greater destruction later. That doesn't make the pain less real or less difficult, but it does give it meaning, purpose, hope. This is not abandonment. This is the fierce love of a father who won't give up on you, who will do whatever it takes, even painful things, to bring you home, to restore you, to make you whole. Eighth, Lamentations teaches us that our ultimate hope is not in circumstances changing, but in God's unchanging character. This might be the thread that runs through everything else we've talked about. Because if you read Lamentations looking for evidence that things got better, you won't find it. The book ends with the people still in distress, still crying out, still waiting. Circumstances haven't changed. The ruins are still ruins. The exile continues. And yet there's hope. Not because of what's happening externally, but because of who God is internally, in his essential nature, in his unchangeable character. This is crucial, because circumstances are unreliable. They change constantly. Good times come and go. Suffering ebbs and flows. Health varies. Relationships shift. Finances fluctuate. Nothing in this world is stable. Nothing can be counted on absolutely. If our hope rests on circumstances, then our hope will rise and fall with every change, and will be constantly thrown about, tossed by waves, unable to stand firm. But if our hope rests on God's character, on who he is rather than on what he does or doesn't do in any given moment, then we have something solid, something that doesn't shift, something that can anchor us no matter what storm we're facing. The steadfast love of the Lord never ceases. Not sometimes, not usually, not as long as things are going well. Never. It doesn't stop. It doesn't run out. It doesn't depend on our behaviour or our circumstances or our feelings. It's a constant, a fixed point, a north star. His mercies never come to an end. There's always more, always enough, always a fresh supply. They are new every morning, every single morning, every dawn that breaks, whether we see it or not, whether we feel it or not, whether we're grateful for it or not. Great is your faithfulness. Not great is your ability to fix our problems. Not great is your tendency to give us what we want. Great is your faithfulness, your reliability, your consistency, your character that never wavers. This is what we build our lives on. Not on the hope that God will make our circumstances comfortable, but on the confidence that God himself is trustworthy. Not on the expectation that following Jesus means a pain-free life, but on the promise that no matter what we face it with a God who loves us, who's faithful to us, who will never leave us or forsake us. This is why Christians can have joy in suffering, hope in grief, peace in chaos. Not because we're in denial about reality, but because we know something deeper than circumstances. We know someone more reliable than our feelings. We know God, and we know that his character is our foundation, and that foundation will not crumble, no matter what is built or destroyed on top of it. If your circumstances are hard right now, if you're looking around and seeing nothing but difficulty and loss and uncertainty, let me encourage you to do what the poet did. Remember God's character. Call to mind what is true about him. His love for you never ceases. His mercies toward you never end. They're new this morning, even if this morning feels dark. He is faithful, even when you can't trace his hand. And that truth, that reality, can hold you when nothing else can. Ninth, Lamentations teaches us that honest faith is stronger than pretend faith. Throughout these 5 chapters, we've seen a kind of faith that doesn't put on a show, that doesn't pretend everything's fine, that doesn't offer fake praise to manipulate God into acting. This is raw faith, honest faith, the kind that says exactly what it's experiencing and feeling, that names the darkness as darkness, that questions God while still addressing him. And here's the thing, this kind of faith is actually stronger than the kind that has to maintain a positive attitude at all times, that has to speak things into existence, that's afraid to admit doubt or pain or struggle. Pretend faith is brittle. It shatters when real suffering comes because it has no framework for processing difficulty, no language for lament, no permission to be honest about pain. People with pretend faith often crash spectacularly when life gets hard, because they've been taught that if they just have enough faith, if they just speak positively enough, if they just believe hard enough, God will protect them from suffering. And when suffering comes anyway, as it always does, their faith collapses because it was built on a lie, on the false promise of a pain-free life. But honest faith is resilient. It can bend without breaking because it's not trying to maintain an illusion. It can face suffering because it has a category for suffering, a way to integrate it into belief rather than letting it destroy belief. It can ask hard questions because it's not afraid of questions. It knows that questioning is part of relationship, part of wrestling with God, part of the journey of faith. Honest faith says, I believe in God, and I'm angry at God, and both of those things can be true at the same time. I trust God's character, and I don't understand God's actions, and I'm going to hold that tension and keep praying anyway. I'm in terrible pain, and I still hope, and those aren't contradictory, they're both just true. Lamentations is honest faith on display. It's faith that's been through fire, that's been tested past breaking, that's seen the worst and is still here, still speaking to God, still holding on to truth even while acknowledging pain. If your faith feels weak right now, if you're struggling to believe, if you're full of questions and doubts and anger, please hear this. That might actually be the sign of stronger faith than you realize, because you're still here. You're still engaging. You're still talking to God, even if you're yelling at Him. You haven't walked away. You haven't given up. You're being honest. And that honesty is the foundation for something real, something that can last, something that can carry you through whatever comes next. Don't despise your struggling faith. Don't compare it to other people's performances of certainty. Just keep being honest. Keep bringing your real self to God. Keep hoping even when it's hard. That's the kind of faith that endures. Finally, Lamentations teaches us that Jesus entered into the very suffering this book describes, and He did it for us. This is where we need to land, where all of this has to lead if we're Christians reading Lamentations. Because the suffering in this book, as terrible as it is, as real as it is, as historical as it is, it's also prophetic. It points forward to another moment of suffering, another time when God's wrath was poured out, another innocent one who was crushed and broken and killed. Jesus on the cross experienced the judgment that this book describes. He bore the wrath that Jerusalem bore. He was forsaken, abandoned, left in darkness, made to cry out, my God, why have you forsaken me?" The cup that Lamentations talks about, the cup of God's wrath that was passed to Jerusalem and then to Edom and to all the nations, Jesus drank that cup. In the Garden of Gethsemane he prayed, "Father, if it be possible, let this cup pass from me." But it wasn't possible. The cup couldn't pass. Someone had to drink it. And so Jesus took it, lifted it to his lips, drank it down to the dregs, bore the full weight of God's judgment against sin, experienced the full horror of separation from God, died the death that we deserved so that we could live the life that he deserved. This means that when we read Lamentations now, on this side of the cross, we read it with the knowledge that God himself has entered into this suffering, that he hasn't stood apart from it or merely observed it, but has plunged into the very centre of it, has experienced forsaking and mockery and physical agony and death. We worship a God who knows what it's like to suffer, who has scars in his hands and feet inside, who understands our pain not from a distance, but from the inside, because he's lived it, died it, and then conquered it through resurrection. And this changes everything, because it means our suffering is not meaningless. Jesus has redeemed it, transformed it, made it part of the story of salvation. It means we're not alone in our pain. Jesus is with us in it, having gone before us, knowing the path, able to comfort us because he's walked it himself. It means there's hope beyond suffering, because Jesus didn't stay dead. He rose, and he promises that we will too. That this light, momentary affliction as heavy as it feels, is preparing for us an eternal weight of glory beyond all comparison. That the sufferings of this present time are not worth comparing with the glory that is to be revealed to us. Lamentations ends with a question, with uncertainty, with waiting. But we know the answer that comes later. We know that God did restore his people, that the exile ended, that the temple was rebuilt. And we know something even better. We know that in Jesus, the ultimate restoration has begun, that he is rebuilding not just a physical temple, but a temple made of living stones, that he's gathering not just the exiles of Judah, but people from every nation and tribe and tongue, that he's creating a new city, a new Jerusalem, where there will be no more mourning or crying or pain, where God himself will dwell with his people and wipe away every tear from their eyes. That's where this is all heading. Not back to Eden, but forward to the new creation. Not back to the first Jerusalem, but forward to the new Jerusalem, coming down out of heaven from God. Not back to innocence, but forward to glory, to a state where we will know good and evil and will have chosen good, where we will have been tested and refined and found faithful, where we will bear in our bodies and our stories the scars of what we've been through, but those scars will be healed, redeemed, transformed into testimonies of God's faithfulness and grace. So as we rest here, as we let these words wash over us, as we prepare to drift into sleep, let's hold all of this together. The pain is real, and we don't minimize it. The grief is valid, and we give it space. The questions are hard, and we bring them honestly to God. The waiting is difficult, and we endure it with hope. And the love of God never ceases. His mercies never end. They're new every morning. Great is his faithfulness. Jesus has borne our suffering, conquered our death, and promised us restoration. We wait, but we don't wait without hope. We grieve, but we don't grieve as those who have no hope. We lament, and in our lamenting we find a strange comfort. The comfort of being known, of being seen, of being held by a God who is big enough for our pain and tender enough to care about it. Let's think for a moment about what happens after Lamentations in the biblical narrative, because this matters, because it gives us hope. The exile didn't last forever. 70 years after Jerusalem fell, the people began to return. The prophets Ezra and Nehemiah led them back to the land. The temple was rebuilt, not as grand as Solomon's temple, but rebuilt nonetheless. The walls of Jerusalem were repaired. The people gathered to hear the law read. They wept when they heard it, overwhelmed by the weight of what they'd lost and what was being restored. And the leaders said to them, "Do not be grieved, for the joy of the Lord is your strength." The joy of the Lord is your strength. Not happiness based on circumstances, but joy that comes from knowing God, from trusting his character, from believing his promises, even when you can't see how they're going to be fulfilled. That's the kind of joy that sustained the returning exiles as they faced the hard work of rebuilding. That's the kind of joy that sustained the early church as they faced persecution. That's the kind of joy that sustains us now. Joy that exists, not instead of sorrow, but alongside it. Joy that doesn't deny the pain, but refuses to let pain have the last word. And then, centuries later, another kind of restoration began. Jesus came, the Messiah the prophets had spoken of, the one who would bring the exiles home not just from Babylon, but from the deeper exile of sin and death and separation from God. He came announcing the kingdom of God, healing the sick, raising the dead, proclaiming good news to the poor. He gathered disciples from the broken and the forgotten and the despised, and he made them into a new community, a new family, a people defined not by ethnicity or nationality, but by faith in him. And then he went to the cross, became the ultimate exile, bore the ultimate judgment, descended into the ultimate darkness so that we could be brought into light. He cried out in forsakenness so that we would never have to be truly forsaken. He tasted death so that death would lose its power over us. And then he rose, and everything changed. Because resurrection means that death is not the end, suffering is not final, loss is not ultimate. Resurrection means there's always hope for new life, for restoration, for redemption, for things we thought were dead forever to somehow, mysteriously, come back to life.